Chargers begin a 6-game road trip today in Cincinnati. First pitch at 4:10. Former Rams linebacker Leonard Floyd signed a 1-year deal with the Buffalo Bills. Floyd had 9 sacks in each of his last 3 seasons with the Rams. No debates, no speculation, just the info you need. That's your KBLA Sports Minute. I'm Ray Richardson. More news, opinions, and conversation when we come forward on KBLA Talk 1580.
It's our anniversary.
Every weekday during the month of June, we're giving away gear from the KBLA.store to say thank you for your support of KBLA Talk 1580 as we celebrate our 2nd anniversary. Each weekday, a different host will be giving away fresh merch to one lucky caller. All you have to do is keep it locked to KBLA Talk 1580 throughout the day, and our host will tell you when to dial in and when. It's our way of showing appreciation to you for helping make KBLA Talk 1580 the most trusted, credible, and reliable source of information for listeners just like you. Here's hoping you'll be one of our lucky winners. But you can always head over to the KBLA.store anytime for the best in KBLA Talk 1580 gear for yourself and great gift ideas. Now, celebrating 2 years of being your go-to, we're KBLA Talk 1580, and we've got your black.
Some more Dizzy Gillespie for you. I'm Tavis Smiley. You're listening to KBLA Talk 1580, and we are glad about it. June is Black Music Month, and so we're featuring the music of Dizzy Gillespie all 3 hours of today's program. Every day this month, you can expect to hear the best of any number of particular African-American artists as we celebrate June, Black Music Month, and today's artist, once again, is the great Dizzy Gillespie. If you're the second caller right now, 1-800-920-1580, you win a KBLA Talk 1580 swag bag and entrance into our exclusive 2nd anniversary party on Juneteenth. On Monday, June 19, you'll be hanging out with all of our talk show hosts, some amazing artists. We'll be performing live on stage, food, drink, dancing, and lots of fun as we celebrate our 2nd anniversary as your favorite talk radio station. Congratulations to caller number 2 right now from your friends at KBLA Talk 1580. Every day this month we'll be giving away these swag bags. But for the second caller right now, 1-800-920-1580, you win a swag bag and you get entrance into our private party on Monday, June 19th as we celebrate our 2nd anniversary. And we thank you for your support over these 2 years. In this hour, the story of a heroic enslaved black woman named Anarcha who was forced to endure grueling experimental surgeries without anesthesia, so Dr. J. Marion Sims could be regarded as the father of modern gynecology. As statues were erected to honor Dr. Sims, Anarcha's story was relegated to the shadows. Her sacrifice and contributions diminished and overlooked until now. Author J.C. Hallman joins us in this hour to talk about a young, enslaved black woman, a devious surgeon, and the harrowing birth of modern women's health. I am pleased to welcome J.C. Hallman to this program. How are you today?
Very good. Thanks a lot for having me, Tavis.
It's my great delight to have you on. Thanks for the time. Thanks for the opportunity to unpack this story. I said in our first hour that this is one of those sort of hidden figures moments for me. I could also throw in the name Henrietta Lacks, one of those Henrietta Lacks moments. But history is full of African Americans who have made all kinds of contributions. The great intellectual Du Bois once asked this question: would America have been America without her Negro people? Think about that. Would America have been America without her Negro people? As I just said, June is Black Music Month. Can you imagine the soundtrack of your life with no black music on it? America just isn't without the contributions of African Americans. And some of those persons did it willingly, and some did it unwittingly. Some were forced to do it, such as the story of Anarcha. The book is called Say Anarcha, a young woman, a devious surgeon, and the harrowing birth of Modern Women's Health. That is the book. The book is out today, and I'm honored to have J.C. Hallman once again on this program. It's hard to know where to start. This is it's a pretty amazing story. There's a lot of texture to it. I'm not sure again where I want to begin, but I suspect I want to start by asking you to tell me about Dr. J. Marion Sims. Let's start with this devious surgeon first, and more about him, and then we'll build from there. Take it away, J.C. Hallman.
Sure. So Sims is, as you said, he's regarded as the father of gynecology. He was one of the world's first celebrity surgeons. He was a very, very ambitious man, originally from South Carolina, moved to Alabama, set up shop in Montgomery, and that's where the series of surgical experiments on Anarcha, two other women named Lucy and Betsy, and approximately 7 other women took place between 1846 and 1849. And as Sims has gone on to be known as the father of gynecology, this is sort of the creation narrative of his career. So this moment is really the creation story of modern women's health. And, for many years, Sims' story stood unquestioned, in terms of the laudits he received, and he was a ultimately very, very self-serving figure. Everybody knew that about him. He was kind of a P.T. Barnum. I just published a piece this morning in which I described him as a Trump with a knife, which is, I think is very accurate. But his legacy did not get questioned, really. It started to get questioned in the late 1960s, and people have been looking at that history for a time now, mostly in scholarly venues. And what I noticed when I started to look at this story was that no one had really gone searching for Anarcha or for any of the young women who had been part of these initial experiments. So I set out to tell a story that was simultaneously a kind of forensic level examination of his entire career, to expose that legacy for the fraudulent fiction that it is, and at the same time make an effort to find Anarcha, who was the most consequential of those experimental subjects. And I did succeed in finding her and managed to recreate her life story.
We're going to talk about her as we move through this hour. Let me stay with Dr. Sims for just a second here.
Sure.
When you refer to him, and the phrase is arresting, Trump with a knife, I get it. But unpack that a bit more for me, because to be compared to Donald Trump these days is not exactly a compliment. And then when you call him Trump with a knife, that's a real serious dig, pardon the pun. So unpack that frame, that line you've used in the piece you published today, where you refer to him as Trump with a knife.
Yeah, so he was one of the first acolytes of P.T. Barnum. Sims was, and I would say Trump is very much in the vein of a P.T. Barnum-like figure as well.
No question.
And so one of the amazing things. So a connection between Sims and Barnum has been noted before in other writers' work, but I really sort of homed in on when Sims met Barnum and how that related to who he became, because Sims claimed to have performed these experiments on Anarcha and the other enslaved women, claimed this cure for a particular condition that they suffered from in 1849, and then published about it in 1852, in which he was using the narrative of an enslaved woman to launch himself into celebrity. And he met Barnum in 1851. Right in that tiny window between when he claimed this cure and when he then used the story of an enslaved woman to launch himself into celebrity. And the thing is that Barnum did the same thing. That Barnum's first sideshow act was a woman named Joyce Heth, an enslaved woman whom he purchased and then presented to the world as the 161-year-old nurse of the young George Washington. And of course, that was false. That was a scam that he perpetrated on the public. And so Sims was very much just following in P.T. Barnum's footsteps, in exploiting the story of an enslaved woman to make himself famous. And I think that this is everyone who's ever been known primarily as a showman since then has been compared to Barnum, and Barnum has managed to escape. There's musicals made about him and such, but he's generally still regarded as a scammer, and so I think it puts Sims and Trump and Barnum all in that same kind of trajectory or category.
So now you know a bit more about Dr. J. Marion Sims, who again is hailed as the father of modern gynecology, founded a hospital in New York City, and made a profitable career, as you heard J.C. say a moment ago, treating gentry and royalty in Europe, becoming one of the world's first celebrity surgeons. Think Dr. Oz, think a long list of other celebrity doctors these days, Dr. David Agus, and I don't mean to cast aspersion on them. I'm just saying these are names that we know in the world of medicine that are pretty well known, David Agus and Dr. Oz and others. Statutes were built in his honor, J. Marion Sims, that is. But he wasn't the hero that he made himself appear to be, and that's what J.C. is explaining to us right about now. When we come forward, I want to get more into the story of Anarcha, who she was, who these other women were, and what exactly they had to endure, what exactly he did to them, how they were used and exploited in this process, and ultimately how we are the better for the sacrifice that they made when it comes to women's health all these years later. We're talking 1849. We owe them a debt that we can never repay, and we'll talk more about that with the author of the book, Say Anarcha, a young woman, a devious surgeon, and the harrowing birth of modern women's health. The book is out today. Its author, J.C. Hallman, is our guest right now on KBLA Talk 1580.
To talk about. Good thing we've got 3 hours. More of Tavis Smiley when we come forward.
Did you know that all City of LA renters have rights? Check out these 3 facts. Residential tenants can't be evicted without reason or just cause. Eviction protection still exists for unpaid COVID-19 rental debt due before March 31st, 2023. And you have 5 days to respond to an eviction notice. 5 days. Many Angelinos may be at risk of losing their home, and that's why we want you to know your rights. Learn more at housing.lacity.org. Be informed, be protected, be at home.
The Heart of a Black Man, inspiring stories of triumph and resilience. Co-authored by 30 Black men. Message of hope and empowerment. RSVP today at MalikBooks.com. Saturday, June 10th at 5 p.m. Westfield Culver City Mall. Come out and meet and greet 4 Black men sharing their personal stories. Also, meet newly published co-author Malik Muhammad. Founder of Malik Books and book activist will be discussing and signing his chapter, From Devastation to Elevation. Saturday, June 10th at 5 p.m. RSVP today at MalikBooks.com. Westfield Culver City Mall. Come meet and greet co-authors Dr. Rael Sims, Cornell Ward, and Kendry Berry. Meet and greet book signing event, The Heart of a Black Man, at MalikBooks.com.
Meet Joe A,
Hi.
Joe B,
Hello.
and Joe C.
What's up?
3 everyday Joes perfecting their banking with Chase. Joe A is locking his lost debit card with the Chase mobile app. Joe B is cruising toward his new ride with AutoSave. And Joe C's Chase banker is helping him budget to go back to school. Tools that help protect. Support for what's next. One bank that puts you in control. Visit chase.com/checking. Chase. Make more of what's yours.
Chase mobile app is available for select mobile devices. Messaging and data rates may apply. JP Morgan Chase Bank, N.A. member FDIC.
King C. Gillette is the modern man's answer to their facial hair. A complete set of precision tools and quality care products fit for your beard style. There's the King C. Gillette Beard Thickener that strengthens the facial hair you already have while increasing the volume of each strand for a noticeably thicker look. And with daily use, it maintains thickness with a lightweight fragrance with the King C. Gillette signature scent. Master your style with King C. Gillette.
Let's unpack a little bit more with Tavis Smiley. The conversation continues right now.
Some of the best of Dizzy Gillespie all day today on our program. You are listening to Tavis Smiley on KBLA Talk 1580. So glad to have you with us in this hour. Our guest in this hour is the author of the new book, Say Anarcha, a young woman, a devious surgeon in the harrowing birth of modern women's health. He is J.C. Hallman, and I'm delighted to have him as our guest in this hour to talk about this enslaved black woman who was subject to any number of procedures and surgical experiments without anesthesia, unwittingly becoming his muse, which allowed him to become known as the father of modern gynecology. And I'm glad again to have JC on to talk more about it. So we talked about Dr. Sims, and of course we'll talk more about him as we move through this hour. But now I'm curious, JC, to hear more about Anarcha. Tell me about this enslaved black woman named Anarcha.
So I'll first point out that until I found the evidence of Anarcha in archival materials in Alabama, all that was known about Anarcha, Lucy, or Betsy, or any of the women who were part of Sims' earliest experiments just came from him. He was the only source. So people had been talking about this. People had likened her to Henrietta Lacks, as you did, because it is the same exact kind of story. But nobody knew anything about her that didn't come from him, and nobody trusted him. And so when I noticed that, when I first heard about the story, I wondered, well, could anything be found that even just proved that she existed? And so I, on a kind of a flyer, I just flew down to Alabama and began looking around in archives there, and I found her in an archive inventory from 1828 from the Westcott plantation, which is where Sims had said she had come from. And so I was able to discern a few things about her, that her relative age. She was the fourth of 5 children of a mother and a father named Jerry and Sue. She had been impregnated in sometime in 1844, was then taken to Sims so that he could perform a forceps delivery of her baby when her baby did not come by natural means. She was suffering from a prolonged obstructed labor, and then subsequently presented with what's known as obstetric fistula, which is a really horrific condition that was largely thought to have been incurable at the time. There had actually been cures, and Sims would claim to be the guy who cured fistula in Anarcha, but there had been other cures. But it was a condition that had largely stymied the medical world, and so then subsequent to that, I was able to verify through other records that Sims had actually encountered Anarcha previous to that she had cared for him once when he had malaria about 9 years prior to her pregnancy, when she's probably around 8. And then I figured out what happened to her. That she came to be owned by a different enslaver, and stayed for a few years more in Alabama, but then left and was taken to Richmond, Virginia, where she suffered additional experiments, and then was experimented on again in New York City. So, and all of this was in records that I was finding. And so, what ultimately this meant, and this probably is the big discovery of the book, is that the so-called first cure of the father of gynecology was, in fact, never cured. And I followed her life, all the way through to the end of her life. I know that she worked as a nurse and as a midwife, both before and after and during the period of the experiments themselves in Montgomery. I know that she spent some of her life in Bowling Green, Virginia, and then her final years, and she lived until just after emancipation, in King George, Virginia. And just by an incredible set of coincidences and hard work and the goodwill of people who devoted their entire lives to primary source records, I managed to find her gravesite, a marked stone in the middle of a remote woods in Virginia. And we're working now to try to make sure that her gravesite is identified and protected. And my long-term druthers would be to try to get to make it possible for people to go visit that site, and because she does represent this really, really important moment in the history of medicine, and Anarcha still stands as this figure to whom we all are indebted in one way or another.
Yeah. You said a lot there, and I did not want to interrupt. I'm glad you got it all out because now I can start to interrogate some of that. Let me start with your latter comment. Your latter comment, JC, when you say that that we owe her a debt, what specifically do we owe her? What specifically are we drawing a line to between what we know about gynecology today and what her sacrifice allowed us to know then?
Well, it's not quite that simple. When Sims started this infirmary or this clinic in Alabama, he then took that idea to New York and he started a hospital there. That hospital in New York, which was supposed to be the same kind of thing, a clinic devoted to this particular condition, that was emulated in Ethiopia at the Addis Ababa Fistula Hospital, a very famous hospital. Oprah Winfrey did a couple of shows about this hospital, and the founders were finalists for the Nobel Peace Prize a couple of times, and a very famous place. And that hospital then inspired fistula clinics really all across Africa and all across the developing world, because this condition, although it's been eradicated in the West, is largely still a crisis in a great deal of the world. But the thing that really transferred, the clinical advance that transferred from Alabama to New York, to Ethiopia, and then to the rest of the world had nothing to do with Sims. It wasn't anything he did. Rather, it was these young women, these young enslaved teenagers who pioneered accidentally a patient-centered model of care. They lived together. They cared for one another during the extensive periods of aftercare that this condition and the surgery for it required. And that was the thing that got emulated in Ethiopia. The calling on fistula survivors themselves to become nurses and assistants to care for one another and to make that essential part of how women come to contend with this condition and its aftermath. And so the model that was pioneered by Anarcha and Lucy and Betsy and those 7 other young women, that is the clinical advance. That is the life-changing thing. And I think, more broadly, that because that moment and that thing did represent this sort of leap forward in the history of medicine, in the history of gynecology, that it still does represent an important advance. But it is central to my book that we take the credit away from Sims and we give it where it really, we give it to the people who it truly belongs to, which is this small group of enslaved teenagers.
You've already in part answered this question, but I want to ask it more directly and more expressly for the obvious reason. I mentioned Henrietta Lacks. You mentioned Henrietta Lacks. My friend, the brilliant attorney Ben Crump, is on the case now. I am expecting any time, any day now, in the very near future. I'm expecting, I could be wrong about this, but I talked to Ben not long ago. He has taken on this case for the Lacks family. They have never been compensated for these HeLa cells that have been used, of course, around the globe, courtesy of these experiments, if you will, on Henrietta Lacks. So Ben Crump is the family attorney, and every major pharmaceutical has benefited from this. My sense is that this may very well be the largest settlement in the history of the world. That's my sense, that Ben Crump could, in fact, extract the largest settlement in the history of the universe. I'll see if I'm right about that, but I know that's what they are. They've, of course, filed a lawsuit, and they could ultimately end up in court. I don't think these pharmaceuticals want to do that, so my sense is we're going to have a huge settlement announced somewhere down the road if Ben Crump does what I think he's going to do. I raised that because that's going to be a major story when it happens. To that end, when you say Henrietta Lacks and I say Henrietta Lacks and we now say Anarcha and these other women belong on the same mantle, the same pedestal, if you will, as Henrietta Lacks, why does Anarcha belong on that pedestal?
Well, I think, from a perspective of consent, it's certainly the case. I mean, Henrietta Lacks never consented to anything. And
exactly.
As an enslaved woman, or as enslaved women, Anarcha, Lucy, Betsy, and many others, and there are actually others whose names we do know who were experimented on by Sims in that same place in Montgomery, but they were not part of that initial group of experimental subjects. So that is that. I think that they fall into that same category.
They had no say so. That's your point. They had no control over this.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and Henrietta Lacks died not knowing at all.
Right.
That her. But there are hints that perhaps Anarcha did have a sense that her story was important to the history of medicine. That because she did go to New York and she saw this hospital that was making Sims famous. And she was there, and so she would have had an inkling of what was happening. And and I have I'm still really in the early stages of this, but Anarcha had a number of living children. She had 10 children. She had 10 pregnancies that came to term. There were 4 children who were living when she herself passed. But it does seem as though she did not have any children who then had children, that her children died childless. And however, she is buried alongside the man who became her husband, named Lorenzo Jackson. And he did have children who survived. And so we've found descendants of Lorenzo. And it's the case that a previous daughter of Lorenzo's and one of Anarcha's daughters were very, very close through the rest of their lives. They both moved to Washington D.C. and they had weddings at each other's homes and funerals and so they were effectively sisters.
Yeah.
And I'll just wrap that up real quick. So I'm in touch with those descendants, but it isn't clear that they have any desire to take it any further than making it so that that gravesite is protected and that they can have access to it whenever they want. And if it ever goes any further than that, I don't know.
Yeah, I want to talk more about that. Excuse me, I want to talk more about that when we come forward. But I really want to get to, though, I didn't miss this, and I'm sure the audience didn't either, that before Dr. Sims experimented with a variety of surgeries, without anesthesia, of course, on Anarcha, she had cared for him. That's the payback, right? That's her gift. That you cared for him when he was sick unto death, and he survives and then uses you as a guinea pig repeatedly. That's the sick part of this story. We'll come to that when we come forward on KBLA Talk 1580.
The station you turn to when you've had it up to gear with cultural incompetence. KBLA Talk 1580.
Thank you for joining us. I'm Mike Moore. Now, here's the latest on the Black Information Network. The feud between the governors of California and Florida is ramping up. California Democrat Gavin Newsom is threatening Florida Republican and presidential candidate Ron DeSantis with kidnapping charges. It stems from South American migrants being sent to Sacramento, allegedly by the state of Florida. A former Princeton professor and progressive black activist, Cornel West, has announced he's running for president on a third-party ticket. He says he'll run on the People's Party ticket. West helped fund the Center for African American Studies at Princeton. In his announcement, he criticized the leading candidates for both major parties, incumbent President Joe Biden and former President Trump. And that's the latest. I'm Mike Moore from your 24/7 news source, the Black Information Network and BINnews.com.
Looks like they're clearing this trouble in Griffith Park, Glendale on the 134 west at the 5. Earlier wreck is gone, but you're tapping the brakes from around the 2 freeway. Carson on the 110 south at Carson Street. Crash on the right side, slow from Torrance Boulevard. Gardena on the 110 south at Rosecrans, listing a wreck here with a busy drive from the 105. And West LA, we're still seeing that top on the 10 east, approaching the 405. A crash in the clearing stages, but leaving the Santa Monica area as far back as Lincoln, we're seeing a very, very busy commute.
Get ready as the Los Angeles Dodgers take on their rivals to the south, the San Diego Padres, in an action-packed series beginning Friday, May 12th to Sunday, May 14th at Dodger Stadium. For tickets, visit Dodgers.com/tickets.
This is the KBLA Sports Minute with Ray Richardson.
The Miami Heat are at home for the next two games in the NBA Finals, but they're getting no respect from the odds makers in Vegas. Despite losing Game 2, the Denver Nuggets are 2.5-point favorites in Game 3 Wednesday night. The Nuggets had won 7 straight playoff games before Sunday's loss. Apparently, the odds makers believe the Nuggets still have the upper hand in the finals. The series is tied at 1-1. After losing 2 or 3 to the Yankees over the weekend, the Dodgers no longer have sole possession of first place in the NL West. They fell into a tie for first with Arizona. The Dodgers begin a 6-game road trip today in Cincinnati. First pitch at 4:10. Former Rams linebacker Leonard Floyd signed a 1-year deal with the Buffalo Bills. Floyd had 9 sacks in each of his last 3 seasons with the Rams. No debates, no speculation, just the info you need. That's your KBLA Sports Minute. I'm Ray Richardson. More news, opinions, and conversation when we come forward on KBLA Talk 1580.
Everybody in the house, make some noise!
Is there a better day of the year to celebrate the anniversary of the only unapologetically progressive talk station west of the Mississippi, focused on issues that impact the black community?
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about.
We think not. A station that amplifies black voices like yours with hosts and guests who look and sound like you. Celebrating our second anniversary on Juneteenth. We're KBLA Talk 1580. And you ain't seen nothing yet. KBLA Talk 1580. We've got a lot to talk about.
Maisha Cairo here with a quick recap from my time at JP Morgan Chase's Advancing Black Wealth Tour. There were speakers Ian Dunlap, Damon John, Lynn Richardson, MC Light, Dom Kennedy, to name a few. Take a listen to what Justin Grant, Community Development Lead at Chase's Advancing Black Pathway, let's see what he had to say.
So I'm Justin Grant. I lead community development and national partnerships for JP Morgan Chase's Advancing Black Pathway strategy. And so we're focused on strengthening the economic foundation of black communities, and we're making targeted investments in programs like the Advancing Black Wealth Tour to help us get our tools and resources out to the community to drive sustained impact over time.
So when it comes to black and brown people, it sounds like Chase is making it their personal responsibility, not only to facilitate these events, but to educate and provide resources. So Mr. Grant, I have to ask, what does wealth building look like for the individual?
It's home ownership, it's having that freedom to be able to start your own business and create jobs in your community, and it's having that long-term plan towards retirement, having that vision for what you want your life to be, and you have the resources to actually live it.
I'm Maisha Cairo. Thanks for sticking around. That was my recap from Chase's Advancing Black Wealth Tour. First stop was here in LA, and they're taking it national.
Are you a small or micro business owner looking for ways to succeed after the pandemic? LA County has got you covered. Gain access to economic opportunity grants and technical assistance to help your business thrive. Whether you need mentorship or capital investment programs, they're here to help. Find out if you qualify at recovery.lacounty.gov/programs. That's recovery.lacounty.gov/programs. LA County and you, moving forward together.
Find a righteous rage and don't be afraid to say what you see. We're KBLA Talk 1580.
The song stylings of Dizzy Gillespie as we celebrate Black Music Month in June on KBLA Talk 1580. Our guest in this hour is J.C. Hallman, researcher, author, essayist. His latest book is called Say Anarcha, A Young Woman, a Devious Surgeon, and the Harrowing Birth of Modern Women's Health. This book is out today. There are already comparisons being made between Anarcha and Henrietta Lacks, and it's quite a story, and we've been unpacking it for the better part of this hour, and we've got more ground to cover here. There are two things I want to come back to, JC, that you referenced earlier that I think are worth interrogating. The first is a quick question. When she was first impregnated, prior to being married, of course, as a baby, really, on this plantation, do we know who impregnated her?
Not precisely. I mean, in the book, I try to address that ambiguity by describing a scene in which she herself is not aware. There were lots of ways in which enslaved women could become impregnated by, an enslaved man being hired from a fellow plantation, from an overseer, from an enslaver himself, from an arranged marriage of enslaved people. So there's a lot of possibilities there, but precisely no, there isn't like a document that says this is who the father was.
Now I was trying to see whether she was impregnated by her master. I was just curious as to what we knew about that. The second question,
I think that's very, very possible. Based on photographs I've seen of the Westcott family, and To just get into the weeds just a little tiny bit to address that. In 1828 there were approximately 29 enslaved people on this plantation, and in 1841 there were more than 80. So the numbers had gone up dramatically inside 13 years, and 30 of the enslaved people on the plantation in 1841 were under 13 years of age, so had been born since then. So it's pretty clear that this plantation was breeding enslaved people. And particularly when you were when a baby was part white, you could sell that child for more. That was more valuable. So I think it's very likely that one of the enslavers, there were two sons who were running the plantation at that time. I think it's very possible that one of them was the father.
Well, we can do the math. We ain't stupid. You don't go from
Right.
You don't go from 29 to 80 slaves in a matter of years without somebody impregnating a lot of enslaved people and a lot of teenage enslaved women impregnated.
Right.
Somebody was doing something, and that's pretty obvious. I just wanted to ask that question because you mentioned it, and I thought it needed some interrogation. That said, now this other point that really struck me, and I'm sure the audience felt the same thing that I felt, which is that this young enslaved woman, Anarcha, had cared for Dr. Sims, if I heard you correctly, when he had malaria, correct?
Right.
So he has malaria, and she is taking care of him. And then years later, he does this to her. I'm not naive in asking this question, but what do you make of that? Because that's kind of sick to me that she helped care for you when you were sick with something that could have killed you, certainly back then. Malaria not as deadly today as it was then, but it could have killed you. So you're sick unto death. She's your caretaker. She's your nurse. And then when you get well, you inflict this kind of harm, as it were, on her. Connect those dots for me to the best you can.
Yeah, so it's strange, that the one of the things that I found that really hadn't been used in any other treatment of Sims' life or Anarcha's life was a series of letters from Sims to this guy named Jarvis during the period of the fistula experiments. And it's the only time that we see Anarcha's name in Sims' own handwriting. And he's referring to the fact that Anarcha at this moment is being leased as a nurse to a hotel, and this guy Jarvis had gotten sick, and Anarcha was caring for him. And then when Jarvis gets better, Sims is writing him a letter and telling him about an epidemic outbreak that's happening in Montgomery at the time, and he refers to the fact that another patient is also being cared for by Anarcha. And Sims says to Jarvis, "Anarcha, our Anarcha is caring for him, so you may feel easy about his recovery." Mm-hmm. And what that signals to me is that Sims is acknowledging what he said in his autobiography, that this young woman named Anarcha, that's the same Anarcha as the one that he later performs experiments on. And there's a weird affinity there. And it's not the only mysterious thing about this either, because Anarcha had a very, very severe condition, much more so than the other women who were part of these earliest experiments. So in Sims' performed more than 30 experiments on Anarcha, and far less on the other enslaved women. Now, she had 2 fistula, 2 holes inside of her that Sims was trying to close. He just needed to cure one to convince himself he could do it. So he potentially could experiment on her twice as often as the others. But why would he be spending so much time trying to cure her? It's a weird duplicity. That maybe there's a sign there that he thought he owed her something. I don't know. But he didn't ultimately truly acknowledge what she represented for him. I mean, Sims later talked about the heroism of the women who were part of these experiments, but at that point, he's talking to a Northern abolitionist audience, and he needs to placate them. And so, of course, he's offering this kind of shallow praise. But the truth is that she wasn't truly cured. He was hailing her as this cure, but she wasn't actually cured. And ultimately, he did, give up on her case, as was the case with a number of other young women who came alongside Anarcha and others since. And Sims' assistant in Alabama was a guy named Nathan Bozeman, and he talked about this because it was Sims' assistant who became his greatest critic. It's one of the debates about Sims these days that you get, and there are Sims defenders to this day. I was just responding to one on Twitter this morning, they of course they all think that this is sort of some woke overreaction to this forgotten hero Sims, but the truth is that the Sims' greatest critics were the people who knew him best, were his assistants. They were the ones looking over his shoulder as he worked. And that was true both in Alabama and later in New York.
It seems to me that rather than calling him the father of modern gynecology, we ought to be referring to Anarcha as the mother of modern gynecology. We'll talk about that when we come forward with our guest in this hour, the author of the book, Say Anarcha, a young woman, a devious surgeon, and the harrowing birth of modern women's health, J.C. Hallman, who you're listening to right now on KBLA Talk 1580.
Be sure to like and follow Tavis Smiley at The Real Tavis Smiley and get Twitter updates at Tavis Smiley. The conversation continues when we come forward.
When you're young, life is full of choices. Don't let opioids like highly addictive and deadly fentanyl take away your life and your choices with just one wrong pill. Addiction is a disease that can affect anyone at any age. But there is a choice to get help for this disease. Find medically proven treatment options, including virtual, at choosemat.org.
Are you looking to steer your career in a new direction? Driving for Culver City Bus can be your ticket to a long-lasting career with excellent benefits and paid training. Culver City Bus is looking for customer service and safety-minded bus operators to join the growing team. Culver City Bus offers on-the-job training starting at $19.10 per hour, uniform allowance, and health benefits. Culver City Bus is a great employer. Let Culver City Bus connect you with an essential service job. If you enjoy driving, seek real opportunities for career advancement, and passionate about making a difference in the community, then you are invited to join the Culver City Bus team. Start your journey today by submitting an application at culvercity.org/jobs. For more info, visit culvercitybus.com or call live customer service operators at 310-253-6500.
The Los Angeles Public Library proudly presents the June Jubilee inaugural event commemorating Juneteenth. Join us on June 10th from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. at the Central Library as we celebrate the rich Black culture in our city. This free event will include a special opening celebration featuring African drums procession and a libation ceremony at 9 a.m. along with speakers, workshops, live entertainment, and more for the whole family. Parking is only $1 with a validation. Learn more at lapl.org/Jubilee. That is lapl.org/JUBILEE.
I'm Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. I learned about atrial fibrillation the hard way. My symptoms would come and go. Shortness of breath, fatigue. I kept going. Then I got so lightheaded, I couldn't. My doctor said I have AFib, so I'm about 5 times more likely to have a stroke. Other symptoms, irregular heartbeat, heart racing, chest pain can come and go, but the risk of stroke stays. If you have symptoms, tell a doctor. Visit notimetowait.com.
Sponsored by Bristol Myers Squibb and Pfizer.
We're not for everybody, but we're for everybody. You're listening to KBLA Talk 1580.
Congratulations to Sharonda Smith, who was our second caller earlier in this hour, who wins her KBLA swag bag and is now on the list, on our VIP list of those who will join us for our very private soiree on Juneteenth, celebrating the second anniversary of this radio station. Sharonda Smith, congratulations to you. Thanks for the call, and I look forward to seeing you on June 19th at our big event, our big celebration. Back to J.C. Hallman in this conversation right now, talking about Anarcha, this enslaved black woman who was frankly exploited in these grueling experimental surgeries without any use of anesthesia. I said a moment ago, J.C., that rather than calling him the father of modern gynecology, never mind those persons that you're still arguing with about his legacy, and never mind all the statues that have been erected in his honor, it seems to me that we ought to flip the frame and start calling Anarcha the mother of modern gynecology. What say you?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think it's important to acknowledge, that black and women's groups in New York City successfully lobbied to get one of the Sims monuments removed from Central Park, and that's great. There's still another standing in Montgomery and another in South Carolina. So there's still work to do on that part of the story, but definitely, celebrating Anarcha, Lucy, and Betsy as the mothers of gynecology is equally important. Mm-hmm. And I would point everyone listening to the work of Michelle Browder in Montgomery. Michelle Browder is the creator of the Mothers of Gynecology Monument. An actual monument has now been created, and Michelle is doing a whole bunch of different things to honor these women and to make it proactive and actually doing good things in the world. And I would just advise everyone listening to investigate that work happening there.
I certainly could have started our conversation here, JC, but I'm curious and have been. What is it about this story that attracted you? I'm always amazed and titillated by the backstory of the story, because there's a lot of research here, a lot of work that goes into bringing this story to life. You unearth details about Anarcha that had not been known previously. What was it about this story that pulled you in?
Yeah, I would first say that, but even though it's a very heavily researched story, I tried to deliver it in a way that is engaging and interesting. It is ultimately a story. It's sort of a book that reads like a novel, mm-hmm. So you're not like interacting with a bit of scholarship. When I first heard about it, I kind of came in the back door. I heard about the ongoing fistula crisis in Africa and realized, well, there was this major international story about that, and then I investigated that and then took it backwards to the story of Sims and Anarcha. This is way back in 2015, and I think initially it appealed to me as a kind of journalist with a conscience. I mean, I want my work to be doing something good in the world, and it kind of stayed that way for a while. But then at a certain point when I really threw myself into the book, kind of that all-in moment for me. One of the things I did was I went to Africa to bear witness to the fistula crisis all across Africa, so all across the continent. So I was in Ethiopia and Nigeria and Uganda, and I met dozens of women who were alive today and who were fistula survivors and nurses. I was meeting dozens of Anarchas, and that just transformed the whole thing for me. It became much more like a life mission after that. It was a transformational trip and an experience, and I think that this project, this story, this history has just changed my relationship with my own job as a writer, as a thinker, as a journalist.
Mm-hmm. When we come forward in our remaining moments with J.C. Hallman, I want to ask, get his take on why and how he thinks Dr. J. Marion Sims has gotten away with this fraud for so long. He is not the father of modern gynecology. She is the mother of modern gynecology. I'm not naive, of course, in asking it, but how do these folk get away with these false narratives for so long? Statues erected in their honor, books written about them, documentaries done about them, and it's all a lie. until somebody comes along and tells the real story of what happened. I'm curious as to his take about how Dr. Sims got away with this fraud once again for as long as he did. We'll do that in a moment on KBLA Talk 1580.
Say the quiet part out loud. KBLA Talk 1580.
The party of the summer is back. The Hollywood Bowl Jazz Festival returns on June 17th and 18th with an incredible lineup curated by Kamasi Washington and Herbie Hancock. See Kamasi himself, Belle Biv DeVoe, West Coast Get Down with Raphael Sadiq and Leon Bridges, St. Paul and the Broken Bones, Samara Joy, Diggable Planets, Poncho Sanchez, Aziza, The Soul Rebels with Big Frida, and many more. Hosted by Arsenio Hall. Get your tickets now at HollywoodBowl.com. Hollywood Bowl, forever summer.
Big tobacco cigarette butts filter practically nothing and are made of microplastics that are toxic and cunning. More than 15,000 fibers lurk in every cigarette butt you see. Could they harm your families? Quite possibly. They could end up inside of you, your bodies, their prey. New studies even indicate possible links to mutations in DNA. An evil lie with a future's worth of harm. To the world, now you know, so sound the alarm. Learn more at undo.org.
Did you know that all City of LA renters have rights? Check out these 3 facts. Residential tenants can't be evicted without reason or just cause. Eviction protection still exists for unpaid COVID-19 rental debt due before March 31st, 2023. And you have 5 days to respond to an eviction notice. 5 days. Many Angelinos may be at risk of losing their home, and that's why we want you to know your rights. Learn more at housing.lacity.org. Be informed, be protected, be at home.
Hey, Dad, how do airplanes fly? What's in this box? Is this tree good for climbing? How are babies made? What does this thing do?
Kids are curious about everything, including guns. Talking to them about gun safety in your home is a good first step, but you can do more. Always keep your guns locked, unloaded, and stored separately from ammunition. Safe gun storage saves lives. Learn how to make your home safer at endfamilyfire.org. That's endfamilyfire.org. Brought to you by End Family Fire, Brady, and the Ad Council.
Hi, it's Dominique DePrima from KBLA Talk 1580. It's going down on Juneteenth weekend, Saturday, June 17th at 11 a.m. for the Ribbon Cutting and Street Festival for the New Orleans Corridor in Los Angeles. You know it. It's about time this important part of our story, our culture, was recognized by LA. Join Mayor Karen Bass, New Orleans Mayor LaToya Cantrell, Councilwoman Heather Hutt, and Grammy Award-winning musicians Irvin Mayfield, Terrace Martin, and 1,500 or Nothing for an amazing celebration. Go to NOLA2LAtickets.org to claim your free ticket. That's NOLA2LAtickets.org. I'll be your MC, and I will see you there. Saturday, June 17th at 11 a.m. It's the New Orleans Corridor in LA for Juneteenth 2023.
Conversations that matter. You're listening to Tavis Smiley on KBLA Talk 1580.
Jesse Hallman, I was just thinking during that break about the conversation I had earlier on today's program about the ways in which Ron DeSantis in Florida and others around the country, to your invocation of the word woke earlier in this conversation, they're pushing this anti-woke agenda, as they would call it, that has a lot to do with banning books and defunding DE&I programs and all the stuff that we all know, attacking critical race theory, all the antics that we see coming from the political right in this country. I don't mean to make you political. Give me a second here to make my point, and I want to get your take on it. But we were just talking about that earlier, all that drama that's going on in our country and this cultural war that's only going to get more aggressive between now and the presidential race. I thought about that, and then I thought about the fact that while they want to ban certain books, there are stories that abound about persons who happen not to be African American in this country that are really just fraudulent. And as time goes on, we learn more and more about the truth behind these narratives that have been presented to us. And so Dr. J. Marion Sims is just one of these stories. But I'm just processing how many stories like this have we not as yet learned the truth about, because the true research has not been done to bring us the story of what really happened. I say all that to ask what you make of the fact that Dr. Sims has been celebrated around the world and gotten away with this false narrative for as long as he has, until you and others show up to give us the real truth.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that's important to remember is that the problem was never just Sims.
Yeah.
It was a lot of doctors who were his supporters at the time, and I want to point out, Sims went on to become the president of the American Medical Association, and I'm going to speak at the annual convention of the American Medical Association this weekend, and it's relevant. That's why I'm going to talk about the fact that he was once the president of that organization, and why he's the president of that organization is kind of a separate story. But it's important to point out that Sims had many, many contemporary critics,
right.
Doctors themselves, former presidents of the AMA who were themselves critics of this guy. But those doctors tended to be doctors who argued on behalf of a more humble profession, of doctors that weren't endlessly seeking after glory and fame. So it's not a surprise that those voices were then drowned out by doctors like Sims and others who wanted to sort of ride the coattails of his success. And so, particularly in the first half of the 20th century, there was this chorus of hagiographers, all of these doctors that just erected this rhetorical facade to J. Marion Sims that went far beyond what even he himself had done. And that's the answer to that question.
Yeah.
It wasn't just him.
No, I hear your point. I only got 45 seconds left. I hate to cut you off, but I want to hear this answer right quick. So give me some sense of what you expect to say to the AMA, the American Medical Association, of which Dr. Sims, as you mentioned, was once president. What would you say to them about this story?
Well, I think it's a truth and reconciliation, it's a story in the sense that the Sims part of it is, my book's a dual biography. There's the Sims story and there's the Anarcha story, and the Sims story is the reconciliation. We need to be honest about what really happened, and the truth part about it is Anarcha, that she is the real truth, the real hero, the real figure who represents the actual clinical advance that came out of those experiments. And so you put those two things together and you really get to the spirit of what truth and reconciliation is supposed to be about.
He is speaking to the American Medical Association later this week, but you heard him first here today on KBLA Talk 1580. The book drops today, and you heard him today, and we thank him for the honor of talking to him today. The book is called Say Anarcha, A Young Woman, a Devious Surgeon, and the Harrowing Birth of Modern Women's Health. Its author is J.C. Hallman, who we owe a great deal of gratitude and respect for and to bringing this story to the forefront. J.C., have a great trip to the American Medical Association. Thanks for your time today, and congrats on the book, on your pub date.
Thank you so much.
My great honor. Kamasi Washington in hour 3 of Tavis Smiley on KBLA Talk 1580.
KBLA 1580 Santa Monica.
I'm Mike Moore. Here's the latest from the Black Information Network. The mother of a 6-year-old boy who shot his teacher in Virginia is facing federal charges. African-American Deja Taylor is charged with being an unlawful user of a controlled substance in possession of a firearm and making a false statement during the purchase of a firearm. Court documents allege she claimed to not being an unlawful user of any illegal drug when purchasing a handgun last year, even though she was a marijuana user. The National Transportation Safety Board says recovery of the plane that crashed in Virginia Sunday and killed 4 people begins today. Officials spent all day Monday at the remote crash site near Montebello, Virginia, assessing the wreckage. A senior NTSB investigator described it as destroyed, noting that what remained was not even recognizable as an aircraft. And that's the latest. I'm Mike Moore from your 24/7 news source, the Black Information Network, and BINnews.com.
Heavy traffic in the Sepulveda Pass around an earlier wreck on the 405 South at Getty Center Drive. That is cleared to the right shoulder, but traffic's jammed up out of the valley from Victory Boulevard. In Hawthorne, working on a wreck on the 405 South at Rosecrans Avenue.